In the roar between clouds and metal, a single silhouette came to define an era of aerial combat. The Messerschmitt Bf.109, compact, deadly, and endlessly adapted, rose from the ambitions of German designers and the pressures of war to become one of the most produced fighters in history. This is the story of its origins, its innovations, its victories and defeats, and the men who flew it into the fire of the Second World War. To understand the Bf.109 is not only to study a machine, but to trace a thread through the evolution of air warfare. It was small and fast where others were larger, and heavier agile where rivals were cumbersome. It carried technological choices that would influence fighter design for years to come. A streamlined fuselage, an advanced inline engine, and a relentless focus on performance. The Bf.109's story is also a human story of designers pushing boundaries, of factory workers building in relentless cycles, of pilots who trusted their lives to thin sheet metal and a roaring engine. From airfields over Spain and Poland to the deserts of North Africa and the skies over Britain and Russia, this aircraft left its mark on history. The story begins in the early 1930s, in a Germany reconstructing its aviation industry. Willy Messerschmitt, an engineer with a reputation for sleek, efficient designs, teamed with Bayerische Flugzeugwerke to push a new concept, a light, low-drag monoplane fighter centered around a powerful inline engine and retractable landing gear. Where many contemporaries favored radial engines and biplane configurations with bracing wires and struts, Messerschmitt pursued clean lines and minimal frontal area. The result was a small, tightly cowled fuselage that reduced drag and improved speed. Designers accepted a cramped cockpit and difficult maintenance accessibility in exchange for performance gains. Early prototypes, the M35 and later the Bf.109 series, tested aerodynamics and structural limits. Engineers experimented with cooling systems, propeller gearing, and the delicate balance between weight and armament. Each prototype brought refinements that pushed the aircraft closer to operational readiness. At its heart, the Bf.109 was an exercise in compromise: light, strong, and built for speed. The structure used a welded tubular steel frame with light alloy skin on the forward fuselage, and fabric or thin sheet materials on control surfaces in early versions. The wing was relatively small, giving high wing loading that translated into speed but demanded careful piloting at low speeds. The engine choice was decisive. Early production versions used the Junkers Jumo inline engines, but the Daimler-Benz series, notably the DB601 and later the DB605, became the heart of later fighters. These inverted V12 engines offered a slimmer frontal profile than radial engines, improving visibility and aerodynamics, and provided fuel injection that gave a margin of reliability under negative maneuvers. Armament evolved throughout the life of the type. Early fighters mounted to machine guns synchronized to fire through the propeller hub, and to more in the wings. Later variants concentrated heavier weapons cannons firing through the engine prop hub, or under the wings, transforming the Bf.109 into a potent interceptor and ground attack platform when needed. Landing gear was a point of both innovation and complaint, retracting inwards into the wings. The legs were narrow and created challenging ground handling, especially on rough airstrips. The small, narrow undercarriage track made takeoffs and landings perilous for inexperienced pilots, but aerodynamic gains were clear. The Bf.109 first proved itself in combat during the Spanish Civil War, where it flew with the Condor Legion. Pilots tested tactics, gunnery, and formation flying in a brutal, improvisational environment. These early engagements shaped Luftwaffe doctrine and revealed both strengths and limitations. As Europe plunged toward larger-scale conflict, the Bf.109 became the backbone of Germany's fighter force for the early campaigns: Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and France. Its speed and climb rate allowed it to contest the skies effectively against many contemporary opponents. By the time of the Battle of Britain, the Bf.109 faced new challenges: long over-water missions, limited range, and an opponent with a dense defensive system. Pilots flying from bases in occupied France could only escort bombers for limited periods, forcing tactical compromises. Yet in dogfights, the 109's acceleration and roll rate often gave experienced pilots the edge. One of the Bf. 109's most remarkable features was its continuous evolution. Beginning with the Bf.109 B and C models, designers iterated to increase power, armor, and firepower. Their series, known in the Luftwaffe as the Emil, introduced thicker armor and more reliable armament. Variants then proliferated with the F, G and K series, each adapted to new engines, new weapons packages, and shifting battlefield roles. The Friedrich series emphasized handling improvements and aerodynamic refinements. Pilots often praised the F for its balance in the air, but as Allied aircraft grew more capable, the need for heavier armament and more powerful engines led to the G and later K series variants that carried larger cannons, reinforced structures, and boosted engines. Manufacturing constraints and wartime exigencies meant that not all variants reached their full potential uniformly. Field modifications and factory adaptations created a complex tapestry of subvariants that could differ substantially from one squadron to another for the pilots. The Bf.109 was both friend and challenge. Cockpits were tight, visibility to the rear was limited. Controls were heavy compared to later aircraft, and instruments were arrays of dials that required training and calm under pressure. Training regimens could be intense. Luftwaffe doctrine placed great value on individual marksmanship and situational awareness. Tactics evolved. Energy fighting, boom and zoom passes, and careful use of altitude to trade for speed. Skilled pilots learned to leverage the 109's climb rate and diving speed, avoiding protracted turning fights when possible. But the human cost was high. Attrition rates in some theaters were brutal. Novice pilots often struggled with the narrow undercarriage on rough fields, or with the aircraft's tricky stall characteristics. The stories of aces, whose names and kills would fill pages of wartime records, stand beside accounts of young pilots never returning from their first missions. The Eastern Front demanded brutal endurance. Vast distances, extreme weather, and a relentless tempo strained both machines and men. Here, the Bf.109 encountered Soviet fighters like the Yak and Lo series and faced threats ranging from ground fire to harsh winter conditions. Adaptations were made for the Eastern Theater. Additional armor, winterization kits, and field improvisations. Pilots learned to operate over terrain where recovery was often impossible. Fuel shortages and mechanical failures could be as deadly as enemy action. In the deserts of North Africa, heat, sand, and dust complicated maintenance. The Bf.109 fought alongside and against a variety of aircraft in a theater defined by mobility and supply, reduced visibility, sand in engines and instruments, and extended patrol ranges tested the aircraft's resilience. Despite those challenges, Bf.109 pilots scored victories and developed adaptations for desert operations, while Allied pilots learned their own tactics to exploit the environment. No aircraft is perfect, and the Bf.109 was no exception. Its strengths were clear: excellent climb rate, high top speed for its era, and powerful engines combined with a slim profile that minimized drag. It was lethal in the hands of skilled pilots, but weaknesses constrained its effectiveness. Short range limited strategic flexibility. A narrow undercarriage made ground handling hazardous. Cockpit visibility, especially to the rear, could be poor. And as Allied aircraft improved, no single upgrade could erase the cumulative disadvantage that emerged late in the war. Yet the design's adaptability, its ability to accept new engines, weapons, and field modifications, extended its combat relevance through multiple years and theaters. The story of the Bf.109 is painted in human names. Ace pilots who became legendary in their own time. Men like Adolf Galland, Erich Hartmann, and Wernemders each wrote chapters in aviation history with the 109. Their tactics, leadership, and sometimes controversial decisions influenced how air campaigns were fought. Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring fighter ace in history, flew the Bf.109 in hundreds of combat sorties on the Eastern Front. His record reflects a lethal combination of situational awareness, discipline, and adaptation to the environment. Other engagements, like the intense dogfights over Malta, the desperate combats during the Battle of Britain, and the grinding air war over Kursk, gave rise to individual moments of bravery, tragedy, and technical improvisation. Producing tens of thousands of fighters required a national industrial effort. The Bf.109 was built across multiple factories, subcontractors, and in occupied territories. Wartime pressures led to parts shortages, simplified production methods, and an increasing reliance on less experienced labor as the conflict progressed. Supply lines, fuel availability, and battlefield losses all shaped how the Bf.109 was fielded. Replacement aircraft could not always be supplied at the rate needed, and field repairs often proved decisive in keeping squadrons operational. Despite these challenges, the sheer number of Bf.109s produced ensured it remained a constant presence in Luftwaffe operations through much of the war. After the war, many Bf.109s were scrapped, but a number survived in museums, private collections, and as restorations. These survivors tell stories not only of engineering but of preservation, dedicated volunteers, and restorers who coaxed old engines back to life and rebuilt corroded airframes to fly again. Restoration is part craft, part archaeology. When a Bf.109 returns to the sky, it carries layers of history, original metal patched with modern alloys, recreated instruments, and painstaking research into paint schemes and markings. Pilots who fly these warbirds today speak of a visceral connection to the past, an experience equal parts awe and humility. Exhibits in aviation museums around the world display the 109 in static form or as flyable warbirds, helping new generations understand both the machine and the complex history it represents. The Bf.109's legacy reaches beyond statistics. Its emphasis on aerodynamic cleanliness, engine performance, and a philosophy of quality over comfort influenced post-war design thinking. Aircraft designers studied what worked and what didn't, incorporating lessons into jets and piston engine fighters alike. Furthermore, the Bf.109 is a reminder of how technology, doctrine, and human factors combine in war. It influenced tactics, pilot training, and industrial approaches to fighter production. Its silhouette remains iconic in aviation history. The Messerschmitt Bf.109 was a machine of its time, brilliant in design, formidable in combat, and imperfect in the ways only wartime necessity can reveal. Its story is threaded through human courage, industrial might, and the tragic costs of conflict. As we look back, the Bf.109 offers more than technical fascination. It invites us to remember the lives entangled with its metal and to learn from the history it helped shape. Machines do not decide wars, people do, and the lessons they leave behind deserve close attention. This documentary used archival footage, museum material, and expert interviews. For a full list of sources and suggested reading, please check the description. Special thanks to restorers, historians, and the veterans who shared their memories.